You've entered Bookstorm with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back, Bookstorm listeners, and you're going to be so excited to see who we have with us here today. We're absolutely quite honored to have Geraldine Brooks with us today. I want to tell you a little bit about her. You know her because of the book Horse and many of her other works. We're here to talk to her today about this book, Horse, but I want to give you a little bit about her bio because it is just so remarkable and really quite extraordinary. She is Australian-born, an author and a journalist who grew up in the western suburbs of Sydney. She went to Bethlehem College, Ashfield, and the University of Sydney. She worked as a reporter for the Sydney Morning Herald for 3 years as a feature writer. In 1982, she won the Greg Shackleton Australian News Correspondent Scholarship for Journalism Master's Program and attended Columbia University. Later, she worked for the Wall Street Journal, where she covered crises in the Middle East, Africa, and the Balkans. In 1990, with her husband, Tony Horowitz, she won the Overseas Press Club Award for Best Coverage of the Gulf War. Congratulations. What a wonderful accomplishment and so very important, Geraldine. The following year, the two received a citation for excellence for their series, War and Peace. In 2006, she was a fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies at Harvard University. She returned to Harvard as a visiting lecturer. Now, as I said, so very well deserved. She was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in Fiction in 2006 for her novel, March. Her other novels, you will know, were all on the New York Times bestseller list. Her very first novel, Year of Wonders, is an international bestseller, translated to more than 25 languages and currently optioned for a limited series by Olivia Colman's production company. Congratulations with that. I want to mention your wonderful husband. Geraldine was married to fellow journalist and author Tony Horowitz. They were wed in Tourette-sur-Loue, France in 1984. How very romantic and wonderful. They were together until his most recent death. They have two sons, Nathaniel and Bizu, and we want to add to you our deepest condolences at the loss of your husband. I got choked up when reading your prologue because you shared, and I want our readers to hear this, that Tony Horowitz was the true historian of the family. He loved this story and often kept Geraldine on track. He'd say things like, "Doesn't look like horses galloping to the finish line today." And we are so very sorry for this loss, but we know that your husband is in this story, probably in many ways. And we are certain he is so very proud of the completion of this wonderful novel. And we thank you for joining us here today, Geraldine.
Thank you for having me.
Geraldine, we like to give our listeners a little bit of the background of the story. And so if you'll allow me, I'll just give a summary without giving away any spoilers. And of course, we would love for you to add anything if you think I've forgotten something. First of all, Horse is a beautiful, sweeping saga based on a famous 19th century racehorse. And I want to say for our listeners that it's not entirely what you expect. It's also a story about race, injustice, art and art history, our humanity, and these noble creatures. In 2019, Theo Northam, a Nigerian American graduate student in art history who's living in Washington, D.C., finds a dirty, discarded painting of a horse. And he decides to research and describe its restoration for a Smithsonian Magazine article. Meanwhile, Jess, an Australian bone specialist at the Smithsonian, gets a call about an old horse skeleton that's been stored in the museum's attic. Jess and Theo find themselves unexpectedly connected through their shared interest in the horse. One is studying the stallion's bones for clues to his power and his endurance, and the other is uncovering the lost history of some of the unsung Black horsemen who were critical to his racing success. But the story also takes us to 1850s Lexington, Kentucky, where Jarrett Lewis, an enslaved boy, is the groom for a promising colt that his father, Harry, a freedman, has trained. They form an unusual and beautiful bond. It forms the backbone of the story. But then the horse is sold and a new buyer, and it takes the horse and the boy to a Mississippi plantation where they encounter some difficulties. But they eventually both end up in New Orleans, where the horse thrills the racing world, and Jarrett hopes to buy his freedom. This story connects in so many beautiful ways with then and now, and it will sit on you for days and days and days. We loved it. Mm-hmm. Is there anything you'd like to add, Geraldine?
Only that when I was researching the novel, there emerged another strand to the story, which I did not expect. I always knew that it would be set in the two time periods of the historical events around Lexington's life, and also the contemporary work on the skeleton in the Smithsonian, because these are based on fact. But while I was at the Smithsonian, I found out that there was also another story enmeshed in this horse's life, and that took me unexpectedly to the New York art world of the 1950s, at the birth of the abstract expressionist movement. And I had no idea when I set out to write about a famous racehorse of the 19th century that it would lead me directly to Jackson Pollock's sports car.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. But, that's where your story has a depth and layers to it that are not just unexpected, but beautiful. It's so rich. And if you are ready to brave the storm, I would love to talk about some of those layers.
We can't wait to talk about this wonderful story. And we truly love a historical fiction that is based upon a lot of fact, but then that you've woven into something so beautiful. And I want to say thank you for opening our hearts and minds to a most beautiful creature, the horse. Kristen said before we started, she's a long lover of horses. I didn't have the privilege of really being exposed to a horse, but your beloved character, Jarrett, taught the reader so many things about horses. And I loved this quote from him. He came to believe that horses lived in a world of fear. And when you grasped that, you had a clear idea how to be with them. Also, Jarrett said, my way of thinking, a good horse has no color. It's what's inside that's worth the fret. This historical portion of your story, this time period directly following the Deep South slavery, made the reader wonder if Jarrett was just talking about horses or maybe people too. We realized as the reader that horses and people have some things in common. And I wondered what you as the writer may have been trying to reveal to us about the horse itself in common with mankind, or what we might be able to learn from this beautiful creature.
Well, first of all, I want to say that even if you didn't have horses in your life until now, it's not too late. They only came into my life in my 50s. I was not fortunate enough to grow up in a milieu where horses were a thing that you could fantasize about, because I lived in the inner city, really. And we didn't have, tremendous financial resources of the kind that would allow for pony clubs. So I only discovered the wonderment of horses in my 50s. And I took my first riding lesson at that time. So you have plenty of time to connect with horses. But I've always loved animals, and we always had cats and dogs in our family, and we were devoted to them. They just bring so much joy. But it's a different relationship with a horse, because cats and dogs and people are all on the same side in this one particular way. We're predators, and our eyes point forward. We are looking for our next meal. And when you get to know horses, you realize that they're looking at the world very differently. They're looking all around. Their eyes are set in the side of their head so they can see what's coming at them to make them their next meal. So to cross that barrier with a horse between a predator creature like ourselves and a prey animal, it takes a tremendous amount of patience and a tremendous amount of faith and trust on the part of the horse. And I think that that is where the very deep lessons that we can learn as human beings are to be found, as well as the joy of it, of course.
And I loved your character, Jarrett. I don't want to give any spoilers, but he was so in tune with the horse. It became his best friend. He understood its mannerisms and its movements, and he would watch it from afar and think, oh, this other person should not be handling him in that way. He's not going to understand that. I felt I just loved that part of that story. And I actually thought that pertains to all of us, even as humans sometimes. We know people in a certain way, what they can tolerate and what they can't tolerate. And in that maybe we all shouldn't always be treated the same. Horses and humans need to be approached individually and maybe without judgment for whatever their reactions might be. It was a very deep being able to look inside this horse's mind and being in a very deep way.
Well, if you spend, any amount of time in a barn with a bunch of horses, you realize what individuals they are. They are so extraordinary. Some of them have very strong opinions about things, and some of them have very humorous personalities, and others are all business, and some of them don't form connections easily with humans, and others just can't wait to get into your pocket and they'd crawl onto your lap if they could. So that is something that you learn very quickly if you spend any time with them. And of course, I wanted to center the relationship in the novel on the groom, because you learn very quickly that it's not the owners, it's not the jockeys or the trainers, it's the grooms who have these intense relationships because they're there all the time. They're the ones who feed, they're the ones who groom and brush and tend to the injuries. And it's the groom's footfall that the horse will recognize on the barn boards before anybody else's.
Wow. Fascinating.
Yeah, I love that you're describing trust and respect. It's beautiful. Well, I'd like to pick up on the issue of the grooms. Your story highlighted the contributions of these skilled Black horsemen, grooms, trainers, and jockeys to the thoroughbred racing industry and even horse farms in general. And the role of these Black slave and free individuals has only recently begun to be researched and fully acknowledged. Your story highlights the fact that after Reconstruction in the South, the racing industry became segregated and very dangerous for many of these Black free and slave individuals. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what shifted, and really, has the horse industry in modern times become more diversified, or are we still seeing some of the last vestiges of these aspects?
So the story of horse racing, I should predicate it by explaining that it was huge in the pre-Civil War period. This was the national pastime. There wasn't any baseball or football or anything like that. Everybody followed the races because it was still a very agrarian society, and most people still had a horse in their life. And they loved following the great thoroughbred races. They were very well promoted. The people behind them got a great deal of wealth and prestige, but 50,000 people would show up to these races. So it was really an immense obsession of the time. And it was indeed built on the plundered labor and skills of Black horsemen, many of whom were enslaved or formerly enslaved people. So, and it's true that history has only just started to be excavated, and is extremely interesting getting to know more about these talented men. They all were men, of course, at that time. And then, the war comes and Reconstruction, and a very sincere attempt initially in Reconstruction to right some of the wrongs and injustices of slavery, but that ends very suddenly after Lincoln's assassination. And there's a huge reaction, particularly in the South. But also, in the North, racism is not confined to the South. We shouldn't always be patting ourselves on the back in the North. We've got a terrible history here as well. And in the racing industry, particularly for jockeys, it became impossible. They were really forced off the track. White jockeys would collude and conspire against them in races and make it actually life-threatening. So many very good jockeys who'd been quite famous in the antebellum period had to go abroad in order to pursue their careers, and others just died in abject poverty because they'd been pushed out of this industry that they'd built. And then you ask about today, I'm afraid, there's still a lot of exploitation in the racing industry, not only of these magnificent animals, but also the people who care for them. It's one of the most poorly paid and arduous occupations that there is. And in the stables and on the track early in the morning, the exercise riders, you'll see a lot of diversity, Black and Hispanic people employed, but not in what you would call excellent working conditions at all. So there's a lot of work to be done there.
Wow. I always wonder if, a mutual love of these creatures can serve as kind of a starting point, that commonality. But it sounds like we've got a long way to go.
There are many people in the racing industry who love their horses. I'm not saying there aren't, but there's also a lot of people who are running it as a tax dodge. And they just treat horses as expendable. And to me, that's really tragic, because these are gorgeous creatures who give so much. And my horse Valentine has a pasture mate called Screaming Hot Wings, who is an off-the-track thoroughbred, who was quite a successful racehorse.
Yes, I know this. I know this one.
In his early days, but he left the racing world when he was 5, and luckily he did find a second career. My neighbor has had him since then, and they used to event and hunter jumping, it's called. And he is 33 years old.
Wow.
And when you think about how much that horse has had to give, and how much joy in that mutual relationship there's been, and then you think of all the horses that are just thrown away at 5 years old, and I think that's tragic.
Yeah.
It certainly is. It really is. And having not known as much about horses, the thing that really struck me so strongly in your book was the healing and therapeutic value for a man in this relationship with his horse. Like any other animal, it's shown so brightly in your story for a lot of these different characters, not for all of them, as you said. Some just saw the horse's monetary gain, but the visible beauty of a horse. Listening to your writing about what it felt, the soothing act of brushing a horse was so surprising to me. The comfort of talking to a horse, the understanding of the individuality, as I said earlier. How about just the feeling of riding of a horse, the shared celebration of victory? This surprised me in many ways. Can you, as a writer, share some of your personal feelings for this relationship with your horse, and what your character Jarrett may have been trying to reveal to the reader with his relationship with Lexington?
Well, I'll just tell you the secret here is that Jarrett's relationship with Lexington is my relationship with my horse Valentine. Everything that Jarrett experiences is something that I've experienced. And Valentine and I have volunteered in a program for children with autism. And it's an extraordinary thing when you see these kids who have so many challenges in communication or in organizing their thoughts and even movements, and yet they get in a partnership with a horse, and suddenly everything quiets and everything settles, and you see the joy on their faces. And horses are exquisitely sensitive. The same place where I do that volunteering, they also have a program for veterans who are suffering from PTSD. And just being with the horse can free up so much emotion for these men, and they find it incredibly beneficial. They've told me some of them, some amazing stories about how the horses have just been able to respond to their emotional needs in an incredible, almost, there's something transcendental about it.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. As I read this book, I thought to myself, not everyone could have written this story about a horse. And I knew that you must have a very much of a love for horses to be able to write such heartfelt emotion through this character, Jarrett. And I just have to say, so I love this description about horses can be used for therapeutic purposes. And it's almost as if the horse has a sixth sense or an innate understanding that this person or this child is needy and needs their affection. It's not one way, child loving the horse. It's both ways, horse
The
loving the
horses,
child.
the horses, I think, because their lives are precarious, they understand people who feel that they've been under a lot of threat. So I think that, I don't know, but I think that partly might explain it. And just, I'll just share with you another thing that happens at this marvelous program. It's called Misty Meadows, and it's a therapeutic and community riding center, and it gives access to all kinds of people, elderly people. It's extraordinary seeing people with dementia. They touch the horse and they reconnect with some memory from their youth.
Wow.
Or there's a program for adolescent girls where they just hang out with the herd and see herd behavior. And then they discuss what they've noticed and how the herd works and how, the boss mare, how she keeps the herd in line, and, how she expresses her leadership, how she asserts it. And then they take that and relate it to their own experience in high school.
Wow.
And it's quite wonderful.
That's amazing. Thank goodness for people like that who take the time to donate to needy children and even adults with animals. That's a wonderful cause. Thanks for sharing that, Geraldine.
You just connected me with a memory when you said Misty Meadows, because I have all the Misty books.
You've Chincoteague for sure.
Yeah. Misty's full. I've read them a million times. We talked about your story being very layered, and there's another layer that relates to art. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, because you really conveyed the sense that art matters. It moves people. It can be used to highlight social injustices and expose wrongs. And in early works, I love this aspect of your story. Some of these incitements were very subtle. It would be an object in the background or an unexpected presence of someone. And sometimes that carefully placed object or person was meant to be contemplated and discussed. But in today's frenetic world, do you think that we have the patience to meditate on these provocative works of art? And I was wondering if you think the message needs to scream louder than the rest. And frankly, your novel is doing this, so maybe not. I wonder if you could comment.
I think we live in a world of screaming. I've started to become so repulsed by it that I almost sigh before I check Twitter. There's just become this unrestrained yelling at each other. And I think we're going to have to tone it down, and we're going to have to do it very quickly, because I think it's corrosive, and I think it's poisoning society and politics, and I think it's poisoning our kids' childhoods, frankly, the way they relate to each other on Snapchat, when you get a glimpse of the way they're speaking to each other. It needs to come down. We need to restore some civility. Now, can art help us do that? I hope so. I have Theo talking about his art teacher who just used to make them stare at a single painting for almost the entire class, because we don't look closely enough. We're surrounded by inputs and bright, flashy objects, one quickly overtaking the other. And I think to be required to stop and look closely is something we need to do a lot more.
Yeah, I loved that. When I read that, I was thinking about whether students today, my own children included, would even be able to sit still and be able to contemplate an object. because I don't see that too often anymore. Yeah, especially
Yeah.
my youngest one. So it's
I think, once you put that phone in a kid's hand, your control as a parent has diminished 90% as to
absolutely.
what their inputs are. So I think we need to think about this a lot more carefully.
Absolutely. And your novel, I think, was trying to accomplish that. And that is, let's highlight these injustices and these wrongs, because when you put it in the context of story, that's when it resonates with people now. I think we need something more evocative like that.
So I never think about anything except the story. For me, the story is everything.
Yeah.
And whatever the reader takes from it, that's between the book and the reader. I never set out to present anything that I want the reader to take, because I think that would be presumptuous. And I think we all encounter books and find what we need to find in them at any given time. And if you read a book and then you reread it, even a couple of years later, you'll find something else because you'll be different. So that is the alchemy that happens between the reader and the book. And it really doesn't involve me after I finished writing it.
It's beautiful.
And I love that. That makes the most perfect novel where you're just showing us these beautiful characters. And we've said it before, we almost step inside these people. And instead of telling us what to feel or what to think, we think with them, we feel with them. And maybe we discover something of our own self that we didn't see before. And I believe that's what all of your novels have done, Geraldine. So beautiful, this story, Horse. We highly recommend it to all of our Bookstorm podcast listeners. And can you give us a little glimpse on what you may be working on next?
Well, I am going to work on something a little different. It's a shorter project. I'm not a quick writer. It takes me a while, but I'm going to work on something, and it is nonfiction, but I'm not going to say any more about it yet because it's still in early stages. And then I have another idea for a historical novel that is more in keeping with the rest of my work. And it is inspired, I'll just say this much at this point. It's inspired by an actual piece of furniture.
Oh, that sounds very intriguing. I love both of those. We're so happy that you're still writing. We can't wait to get our hands on your next novel or the nonfiction book. And I want to tell our listeners, please connect with Geraldine Brooks. You can find her on her website. You can also find her on Facebook. And Geraldine, it has been just an absolute pleasure talking with you today. We just adore your writing. It's such a great example for Kristen and I. It's just beautiful stories that resonate with everyone and really open our minds and our hearts, in this one in particular, to this beautiful creature called a horse. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I can't wait to see what Geraldine has out next. I will be the first one in line buying this nonfiction and the fiction book about a piece of furniture in history. That's very fascinating to me. I can't wait to see it.
Absolutely.
Kristen, wasn't this such a wonderful story? I just can't even get over it. What hit me so strongly, I guess, was this 1850s post-Civil War, where Black slaves were supposed to be able to have freedom, but had none of it. Then fast forward to the current day in her book, where Jess is researching the actual Lexington horse's bones, and we're seeing prejudice of characters at the university, even a little from the character Jess that she regretted. And it really made you realize, my goodness, so many years later, can't we be done with these prejudices now? Do they really still exist? I think it's important for books like this to bring this to our attention, because maybe we can sit back and say, I don't have any of that, but we need to double check ourselves and recheck ourselves.
Yeah. And I think this story really highlights some of the roots of these racial issues, because we see, not only disrespect, but we see fear underlying a lot of it. And there's fear today because things are, so highly politicized, so out of our control in some respects. And then we see where, in the South and the North, where we were contending with people who had fears about what would happen next. These were two tumultuous times in history. And how that then translates into how we treat one another was very evident in the story.
Mhm. There was something else in the story about what you just said, treating each other, about first impressions. And sometimes we don't know it, but we may meet someone and maybe we don't realize what our reaction is or our expression is or our prejudgment upon meeting someone just based on the way they look or the way they had just spoken or their accent or what they are telling us their career is. And one of the characters in the book said, "You never get a second chance to have a first impression." They were actually referring to the painting when they spoke of this, but that hit me so strongly, thinking about when I first meet someone, not what my impression of what this person is, but that they would get a good impression of me. It goes like both ways.
Yeah. Well, and I love too that all of the art, there was so much more behind it, what it symbolized, what it was trying to provoke or do. But at first glance, it was in the garbage and it was a horse. Right. And all of the paintings actually that were discussed in the story, it was really neat because there was so much more socially going on in the background that you may not have picked up until you started contemplating getting to know it. And I think that's a really good metaphor for one another. As we get to know people, we start to understand that there's so much more to them. They're not just this one identity or another identity, and we react to that. We're now reacting to the layers of the person.
Mhm. I love that with the comparison with to art with that. I'm a huge art lover. If I go to any city, my first stop is always the art gallery. And I love how in the book she made the students sit and stare at that painting because in an art gallery, you're inundated with so much artwork and you have limited time. So you rush through and you glance a little and you may have the headphones on that describe the painting. But to just sit and really think about that time period in history, even if it's modern art, what the artist was going through, what their life was like, what they were trying to say, or maybe they weren't trying to say anything. Like Geraldine just said about her books. She's not trying to say anything. She's trying to show you a time period and let you make a decision. I think art can have the same effect on people.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I also think that is the same with this creature we're talking about. We're talking about these beautiful horses. We're talking about their nobility. And, for me personally, that really spoke to me because that's what I've always thought about horses. They, to me, encapsulate what I think of when I think of noble creatures
Mhm.
because they're intelligent. They are, thinking and feeling and they emote, but they also take on some of the things that you are experiencing and react to that.
Mhm.
And I grew up loving horses. In fact, I'm laughing because I'm wearing my riding boots right now and on Geraldine's honor and one of my little pieces of jewelry. But I was very fortunate because one of my close friends had horses. We were able to ride bareback all the time. That was an
Wow.
incredible experience because, not only do you have the cliched one with the horse, but you truly have that ability to have that both ways communication.
That's amazing. And
And it
that's a
was
skill
awesome.
too, from what I hear, to be able to ride without a saddle
Yeah.
takes a lot of skill too. I mean, what do
Yeah.
I know? I don't know much of
Yeah.
anything, but this is what I've heard.
Well, we were dumb and young, so that's
Yeah.
we didn't think about, the dangers
My
or anything.
my only thing I know about horses is I did live in Saratoga Springs for 5 years. We lived a mile down from the track. The Saratoga track is beautiful because anyone can go. It's very inexpensive. We would line up at the fence and watch the thoroughbreds march in. These were the same horses that just left the Kentucky Derby. And the musculature, the stature, the mammoth presence of that horse, almost as if that horse even knew he was something special as they walked by, was astounding to me, having known nothing about horses. But I've got a love for horses now too. Geraldine could be right. It's never too late. Next time you'll see me riding a horse somewhere, maybe. You never know. Well, listeners, thank you so much for joining us here today. We were just thrilled. This is our very first Pulitzer Prize winning author on Bookstorm Podcast. We were absolutely honored to meet her and dive down deep with her. We want to give a special shout out to you know who. He's a household name by now. Check him out on YouTube if you haven't seen him in person. The amazing Mr. Mark Carey.
Hope you guys enjoyed today's show, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you, Mark. They certainly will, thanks to you. And I want to give you a couple storm predictions to pique your interest. We have Scott Turow coming up with Suspect. We have Lisa Unger with her book release, Secluded Cabin, Sleep 6. We have Barbara Kingsolver and Demon Copperhead. We're going to be interviewing Pam Jenoff, codename Sapphire, and the wonderful Shelby Van Pelt with her debut novel, Remarkably Bright Creatures.
In the meantime, listeners, stay on the radar with Bookstorm by visiting our website at bookstormpodcast.com. You can visit us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok. And if you'd like to see us in person, or better yet, one of our fantastic authors, just find us on YouTube. You can search for Bookstorm and Podcast, and we should come right up. Until next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.